he was a banana, today's judgment offered a welcome note of personal reassurance.
The Court of Appeal has officially declared that I am not a banana.
It's good to know. The BMA will not be asking doctors who are opposed to the new NHS contracts to work to rule or resign from the health service. The association says taking industrial action is not in the interests of patient care, but protest against the new contract will continue. They hope to change the new regulations during their passage through Parliament. There have been protest marches in London and Belfast to mark the anniversary of a ban on broadcast interviews with Northern Ireland terrorist groups or their supporters. The National Union of Journalists is campaigning to have the ban lifted.
In London this afternoon, journalists urged the BBC and other broadcasting organisations to step up their efforts to overturn the ban. The restrictions apply to 11 organisations, including Sinn Féin. They don't prevent interviews, but they do mean viewers and listeners can't hear the actual words used. Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams says the restrictions have prevented support for Sinn Féin from growing and accuses the broadcasters of self-censorship in running fewer interviews since the ban. The BBC concedes it may have over-interpreted the rules, and editors have been told they must not censor themselves.
We can't possibly say that these restrictions are necessarily going to remove terrorism altogether. But what they are doing, I hope, is removing the opportunity for the likes of Gerry Adams to appear personally on the screen and argue directly to you in your own home.
And the Home Office says it has no intention of lifting the ban.
At the Commonwealth Summit meeting in Malaysia, there have been stormy discussions over the issue of sanctions against South Africa. Mrs Thatcher found herself alone against the other 48 heads of government. They wanted to increase economic pressure against South Africa, but she accused them of causing poverty and hunger.
In the sumptuous palace of the King of Malaysia, there were soothing strings for Commonwealth leaders after a bruising day. The top-table guests seemed relaxed. A few hours earlier, though, they'd been united in attacking Mrs Thatcher. But tonight, she was the keynote speaker, praising the virtues of democratic disagreement. The delegates had started today knowing that ahead lay a divisive debate on South Africa, Mrs Thatcher versus all comers. And they were aware South Africa had just succeeded in rescheduling much of its international debt. Mrs Thatcher had begun with a chat with Prime Minister Hawke of Australia. What she didn't know, and he didn't tell her, was he had in his pocket a declaration calling for intensified sanctions against South Africa. Later, the closed-door debate was stormy, and the strain showed afterwards.
Things are changing in South Africa. They're coming the way we want them to come. And really, the people, when they're doing that, want not merely sticks waved at them and threats. They want a bit of encouragement.
She says there's too much stick and not enough carrot.
There is too much carrot from the British and very little of stick.
The South African debate is over. Now Commonwealth leaders have told their foreign ministers to try to agree on a draft communique. The question is how much posturing is going on. Commonwealth officials here suggest that despite the harsh rhetoric about stiffening sanctions, there could yet be a willingness to give the new South African president a breathing space of 6 months to usher in further reforms. Brian Barron, BBC News, Kuala Lumpur.
The Soviet parliamentary inquiry into the massacre of 20 protesters in Georgia last April says the highest levels of the Soviet leadership were to blame. The official finger has always been pointed at Georgia's own local authorities, but the Parliamentary Commission blames the country's leaders because they decided to send in troops.
It was the end of an emotive investigation into a massacre that shook the whole country. And the report signed today could mark the beginning of political reverberations almost as far-reaching.
The report gives concrete names of those we consider guilty. And the worst tragedy is that it's the whole system of decision-taking that's to blame.
The Commission's task was to apportion responsibility for the massacre and to determine how far up in the leadership the blame should lie.
We Soviet people know who controls this country, and at the time of the massacre, the Politburo committee was being chaired by Mr. Ligachev and Mr. Chebrikov. We know who plays the leading role, and I believe it's Mr. Ligachev and Mr. Chebrikov we should call to account.
At least 19 people died in Tbilisi. The Commission suggests that the decision to send in troops was taken not on the ground, but in the Kremlin. contradicting official claims, repeated by Foreign Minister Eduard Shevardnadze, that it was the Georgian leadership who were responsible. Local party boss Jumbar Patiashvili was forced to resign, and the military commander in Georgia was heckled and barracked when he appeared at the Congress of Deputies. For relatives of the Tbilisi dead, arguments over responsibility will provide little consolation. But popular opinion here is unlikely to be satisfied until the whole truth has been told. Martin Sixsmith, BBC News, Moscow.
And today's main news again. The Guildford Four have been declared innocent after serving nearly 15 years in jail. The appeal court was told that policemen had lied. That's the 9 o'clock news tonight. Good night.
From Newsroom South East, the main stories this evening. Residents in the City of London are criticising plans for a new £10 million heliport. The plans were unveiled by a consortium which includes Midland Bank and the Hanson Group. If it's approved, the heliport will open within 4 years on a site next to Cannon Street Station and will have 100 flights a day.
Even the present level is very unfair and extremely noisy. So any increase is going to be even more unfair and even more noisy and even more irritating for the people who live permanently close to the river.
Fire has badly damaged a paper-making factory in the centre of Sittingbourne in Kent. It started in a paper-making machine before flames 30 feet high destroyed the roof of the building. More than 60 firemen took 2.5 hours to bring the blaze under control. 2 RSPCA workers have been cleared of starving a dog to death. The Doberman dog collapsed at an RSPCA centre at Godstone in Surrey. A post-mortem said it died from starvation, and Superintendent Richard Ball and his deputy Susan Miles were accused of neglecting the dog. But magistrates accepted reports that it was well fed and may have wasted away from a dietary disease. An old people's home in South London has reopened 3 years after staff cruelty towards residents forced its closure. 10 assistants at Nye Bevan Lodge in Southwark were sacked after the allegations. The building's now been refurbished at a cost of £600,000 and renamed Jenny Lee House. The polls have just closed in by-elections that could see control of 2 London councils change hands. In Merton, the Conservatives have a majority of just 1 seat, and in Hillingdon, which has a hung council, Labour could take control if they win 1 extra seat. And that's all from Newsroom South East. Now it's the weather.
Good evening. Well, a rough spell of weather coming up over the next few days. We call it unsettled. You call it very wet and often very windy with severe gales from time to time. Now, everything hinges really on a deep area of low pressure now to the south of Iceland. Lots of isobars in its circulation, and every now and again these weather fronts swinging across the country, bringing bands of quite heavy rain. Another one showing its teeth for the middle of the day tomorrow, way down there to the southwest, but as we're getting a bit closer, you can see by tomorrow tea time it'll be just down there off Cornwall. Severe gale force or even storm force winds then getting into the south of the country, and those strong winds moving further north across the British Isles in the following 12 to 24 hours. Now, it's pretty windy at the moment down in the south. There's plenty of rain around as well, right the way down through Scotland, down through much of northern England, Wales, and into central and southern parts. It's not raining just yet in the far east there of England or Scotland, but the rain's soon pushing across. But eventually, I think by the end of the night, the rain confined to those more northeastern parts of Scotland, but still a fair crop of blustery showers feeding into these southern and western coasts. Quite a strong wind for a while, then that wind just moderating for a time but picking up again in the west as we go through towards tomorrow morning. Now, temperatures tonight really quite academic actually, about 8 to 10, the minimum temperature on offer. So tomorrow morning for the first hour or two, starting off pretty wet, it'll be that far northeastern part of Scotland. There'll be a fair crop of blustery showers still around those western and southern coasts as well, but there'll be some sunshine in between times. But the best of the sunshine in those places which are sheltered from this fairly stiff southwesterly wind. But going through towards the middle of the day, we'll find those showers breaking out once again in more inland parts. Then during the afternoon, perhaps the showers becoming fewer and further between for a while, before more cloud, thick cloud and a strengthening wind brings more rain back into these more southwestern parts as we go through Friday afternoon. Now, temperatures tomorrow are going to feel pretty low, I think, with the fairly stiff wind. 13 to 15, probably the best on offer. That's the upper 50s Fahrenheit. Maybe over there in East Anglia up to 16, 61 for a time in the sunshine if you avoid the showers. But the wind's picking up all the while, up to severe gale force or even storm force winds in the south by tomorrow evening. And that's it from me for now.
Bend over. Derek.
In view of all the press and media speculation, I am preparing a statement which I shall make tomorrow.
What did you do?
Well, it was pretty standard fantasy stuff, really. The present rumour and innuendo is extremely hurtful, not only to my wife and family, but also to my parliamentary colleagues and, indeed, my party.
You promised me I'd never hear another word from either of them. Never, ever again.
I don't see this as a damage control exercise, Derek, so much as a decisive, definitive counterattack.
Screen 1 exposes Blore MP, Sunday at 9:05 on BBC1.
On BBC2 now, in a change to the published programme, 40 Minutes visits a street in West London where the residents, although next door to each other, live worlds apart. Here on One in half an hour, Peter Sisson's guests on Question Time are Jonathan Porritt, Anne Leslie and MPs Paul Berteng and Linda Chalker. That's after we've been for a spin with Captain Blackadder.
Right and centre! Kick dodge!
God, why do they bother?
Oh, it's to kill Jerry, isn't it, sir?
Yes, but Jerry is safe underground in concrete bunkers. We've shot off over 1 million cannon shells, and what's the result? One Dachshund with a slight limp.
Shut up!
Thank you. Right, I'm off to bed, where I intend to sleep until my name changes to Rip Van Adder.